Chapter 17 of Beasts, Men, and Gods. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain and is read by Mark Smith of Simpsonville, South Carolina. Beasts, Men, and Gods by Ferdinand Ossendowski. Part 2, The Land of Demons. Chapter 17, Mysterious Mongolia. In the heart of Asia lies the enormous, mysterious, and rich country of Mongolia. From somewhere on the snowy slopes of the Tian Shan and from the hot sands of western Sungaria to the timbered ridges of the Sian and to the Great Wall of China, it stretches over a huge portion of Central Asia, the cradle of peoples, histories, and legends, the native land of bloody conquerors who have left here their capitals covered by the sand of the Gobi, their mysterious rings, and their ancient nomad laws, the states of monks and evil devils, the country of wandering tribes administered by the descendants of Genghis Khan and Kublai Khan, khans and princes of the junior lines. That is Mongolia. Mysterious country of the cults of Rama, Sakyamuni, Jigong Kappa, and Paspa, cults guarded by the very person of the living Buddha, Buddha incarnated in the third dignitary of the Lamaite religion, Bogdo-Geggen in Takuri or Urga, the land of mysterious doctors, prophets, sorcerers, fortune-tellers, and witches, the land of the sign of the swastika, the land which has not forgotten the thoughts of the long-deceased great potentates of Asia and of half of Europe. That is Mongolia. The land of nude mountains, of plains buried by the sun and killed by the cold, of ill cattle and ill people, the nest of pests, anthrax and smallpox, the land of boiling hot springs and of mountain passes inhabited by demons, of sacred lakes swarming with fish, of wolves, rare species of deer and mountain goats, marmots in millions, wild horses, wild donkeys, and wild camels that have never known the bridle, ferocious dogs and rapacious birds of prey which devour the dead bodies cast out on the plains by the people. That is Mongolia. The land whose disappearing primitive people gaze upon the bones of their forefathers whitening in the sands and dust of their plains, where are dying out the people who formerly conquered China, Siam, northern India, and Russia, and broke their chests against the iron lances of the Polish knights, defending then all the Christian world against the invasion of wild and wandering Asia. That is Mongolia. The land swelling with natural riches, producing nothing, in need of everything, destitute and suffering from the world's cataclysm. That is Mongolia. In this land, by order of fate, after my unsuccessful attempt to reach the Indian Ocean through Tibet, I spent half a year in the struggle to live and to escape. My old and faithful friend and I were compelled, willy-nilly, to participate in the exceedingly important and dangerous events transpiring in Mongolia in the year of grace 1921. Thanks to this, I came to know the calm, good, and honest Mongolian people. I read their souls, saw their sufferings and hopes. I witnessed the whole horror of their oppression and fear before the face of mystery, there where mystery pervades all life. I watched the rivers during the severe cold break with the rumbling roar of their chains of ice, saw lakes cast up on their shores the bones of human beings, heard unknown wild voices in the mountain ravines, made out the fires over miry swamps of the will-o'-the-wisps, witnessed burning lakes, gazed upward to mountains whose peaks could not be scaled, came across great balls of writhing snakes in the ditches in winter, met with streams which are eternally frozen, rocks like petrified caravans of camels, horsemen, and carts, and over all saw the barren mountains whose folds look like the mantle of Satan, which the glow of the evening sun drenched with blood. "Look up there!" cried an old shepherd, pointing to the slope of the cursed Zagastai. "That is no mountain, it is he who lies in his red mantle, and awaits the day when he will rise again to begin the fight with the good spirits." And as he spoke, I recalled the mystic picture of the noted painter Vroubel, the same nude mountains with the violet and purple robes of Satan, whose face is half covered by an approaching gray cloud. Mongolia is a terrible land of mystery and demons. Therefore it is no wonder that here every violation of the ancient order of life of the wandering nomad tribes is transformed into streams of red blood and horror, ministering to the demonic pleasure of Satan, couched on the bare mountains and robed in the great cloak of dejection and sadness, or in the purple mantle of war and vengeance. After returning from the district of Koko Nor to Mongolia, and resting a few days at the Narabanchi monastery, we went to live in Uliassutai, the capital of western Outer Mongolia. It is the last purely Mongolian town to the west. In Mongolia there are but 3 purely Mongolian towns: Urga, Uliassutai, and Ulankam. The 4th town, Kobdo, has an essentially Chinese character, being the center of Chinese administration in this district inhabited by the wandering tribes only nominally recognizing the influence of either Peking or Urga. In Uliassutai and Ulankan, besides the unlawful Chinese commissioners and troops, there were stationed Mongolian governors or saits, appointed by the decree of the living Buddha. When we arrived in that town, we were at once in the sea of political passions. The Mongols were protesting in great agitation against the Chinese policy in their country. The Chinese raged and demanded from the Mongolians the payment of taxes for the full period since the autonomy of Mongolia had been forcibly extracted from Peking. Russian colonists, who had years before settled near the town and in the vicinity of the great monasteries or among the wandering tribes, had separated into factions and were fighting against one another. From Urga came the news of the struggle for the maintenance of the independence of Outer Mongolia, led by the Russian general Baron Ungern von Sternberg. Russian officers and refugees congregated in detachments, against which the Chinese authorities protested, but which the Mongols welcomed. The Bolsheviki, worried by the formation of white detachments in Mongolia, sent their troops to the borders of Mongolia. From Irkutsk and Chita to Uliassutai and Urga, envoys were running from the Bolsheviki to the Chinese commissioners with various proposals of all kinds. The Chinese authorities in Mongolia were gradually entering into secret relations with the Bolsheviki, and in Kyakhta and Ulankam delivered to them the Russian refugees, thus violating recognized international law. In Urga, the Bolsheviki set up a Russian communistic municipality. Russian consuls were inactive. Red troops in the region of Kosogol and the valley of the Selenga had encounters with anti-Bolshevik officers. The Chinese authorities established garrisons in the Mongolian towns and sent punitive expeditions into the country. And, to complete the confusion, the Chinese troops carried out house-to-house searches during which they plundered and stole. Into what an atmosphere we had fallen after our hard and dangerous trip along the Yenisei, through Urianhai, Mongolia, the lands of the Turguts, Kansu and Koko Nor. "Do you know," said my old friend to me, "I prefer strangling partisans and fighting with the Hunghutse to listening to news and more anxious news." He was right. For the worst of it was that in this bustle and whirl of facts, rumors and gossip, the Reds could approach troubled Uliassutai and take everyone with their bare hands. We should very willingly have left this town of uncertainties, but we had no place to go. In the north were the hostile partisans and Red troops. To the south we had already lost our companions and not a little of our own blood. To the west raged the Chinese administrators and detachments, and to the east a war had broken out, the news of which, in spite of the attempts of the Chinese authorities at secrecy, had filtered through and had testified to the seriousness of the situation in this part of Outer Mongolia. Consequently, we had no choice but to remain in Uliassutai. Here also were living several Polish soldiers who had escaped from the prison camps in Russia, 2 Polish families and 2 American firms, all in the same plight as ourselves. we joined together and made our own intelligence department, very carefully watching the evolution of events. We succeeded in forming good connections with the Chinese commissioner and with the Mongolian Sait, which greatly helped us in our orientation. What was behind all these events in Mongolia? The very clever Mongol Sait of Uliassutai gave me the following explanation. According to the agreements between Mongolia, China, and Russia of October 21, 1912, of October 23, 1913, and of June 7, 1915, Outer Mongolia was accorded independence, and the moral head of our Yellow Faith, His Holiness the Living Buddha, became the suzerain of the Mongolian people of Khalkha, or Outer Mongolia, with the title of Bogdo Jebebsung Damba Hutuktu Khan. While Russia was still strong and carefully watched her policy in Asia, the government of Peking kept the treaty. But when, at the beginning of the war with Germany, Russia was compelled to withdraw her troops from Siberia, Peking began to claim the return of its lost rights in Mongolia. It was because of this that the first two treaties of 1912 and 1913 were supplemented by the Convention of 1915. However, in 1916, when all the forces of Russia were preoccupied in the unsuccessful war, and afterwards when the first Russian Revolution broke out in February 1917, overthrowing the Romanov dynasty, the Chinese government openly retook Mongolia. They changed all the Mongolian ministers and saits, replacing them with individuals friendly to China, arrested many Mongolian autonomists and sent them to prison in Peking, set up their administration in Urga and other Mongol towns, actually removed His Holiness Bogdo Khan from the affairs of administration, made him only a machine for signing Chinese decrees, and at last introduced him to Mongolia their troops. From that moment there developed an energetic flow of Chinese merchants and coolies into Mongolia. The Chinese began to demand the payment of taxes and dues from 1912. The Mongolian population were rapidly stripped of their wealth, and now in the vicinities of our towns and monasteries you can see whole settlements of beggar Mongols living in dugouts. All our Mongol arsenals and treasuries were requisitioned. All monasteries were forced to pay taxes. All Mongols working for the liberty of their country were persecuted. Through bribery with Chinese silver, orders and titles, the Chinese secured a following among the poorer Mongol princes. It is easy to understand how the governing class, His Holiness, Khans, princes, and high lamas, as well as the ruined and oppressed people, remembering that the Mongol rulers had once held Peking and China in their hands, and under their reign had given her the first place in Asia, were definitely hostile to the Chinese administrators acting thus. Insurrection was, however, impossible. We had no arms. All our leaders were under surveillance, and every movement by them toward an armed resistance would have ended in the same prison at Peking where 80 of our nobles, princes and lamas died from hunger and torture after a previous struggle for the liberty of Mongolia. Some abnormally strong shock was necessary to drive the people into action. This was given by the Chinese administrators, General Cheng Yi and General Chu Chi-tsiang. They announced that His Holiness Bogdo Khan was under arrest in his own palace, and they recalled to his attention the former decree of the Peking government, held by the Mongols to be unwarranted and illegal, that His Holiness was the last living Buddha. This was enough. Immediately secret relations were made between the people and their living God, and plans were at once elaborated for the liberation of His Holiness and for the struggle for liberty and freedom of our people. We were helped by the great prince of the Buryats, Jajam Bulan, who began parleys with General Ungern, then engaged in fighting the Bolsheviki in the Transbaikalia, and invited him to enter Mongolia and help in the war against the Chinese. Then our struggle for liberty began. Thus the Sait of Uliassutai explained the situation to me. Afterwards I heard that Baron Ungern, who had agreed to fight for the liberty of Mongolia, directed that the mobilization of the Mongolians in the northern districts be forwarded at once, and promised to enter Mongolia with his own small detachment, moving along the river Kurulen. Afterwards he took up relations with the other Russian detachment of Colonel Casagrande, and together with the mobilized Mongolian riders, began the attack on Urga. Twice he was defeated, but on the 3rd of February, 1921, he succeeded in capturing the town and replaced the living Buddha on the throne of the Khans. At the end of March, however, these events were still unknown in Uliassutai. We knew neither of the fall of Urga nor of the destruction of the Chinese army of nearly 15,000 in the battles of Mai Machen on the shore of the Tola and on the roads between Urga and Ude. The Chinese carefully concealed the truth by preventing anybody from passing westward from Urga. However, rumors existed and troubled all. The atmosphere became more and more tense, while the relations between the Chinese on the one side and the Mongolians and Russians on the other became more and more strained. At this time the Chinese commissioner in Uliassutai was Wang Tsao-tsun, and his advisor Fu Xiang, both very young and inexperienced men. The Chinese authorities had dismissed the Uliassutai Sait, the prominent Mongolian patriot, Prince Chultun Beil, and had appointed a Lama prince friendly to China, the former vice minister of war in Urga. Oppression increased. The searching of Russian officers and colonists' houses and quarters commenced. Open relations with the Bolsheviki followed, and arrest and beatings became common. The Russian officers formed a secret detachment of 60 men so they could defend themselves. However, in this detachment disagreements soon sprang up between Lieutenant Colonel M. Mikhailoff and some of his officers. It was evident that in the decisive moment the detachment must separate into factions. We foreigners in council decided to make a thorough reconnaissance in order to know whether there was danger of Red troops arriving. My old companion and I agreed to do the scouting. Prince Chultun Beil gave us a very good guide, an old Mongol named Tseren, who spoke and read Russian perfectly. He was a very interesting personage, holding the position of interpreter with the Mongolian authorities and sometimes with the Chinese commissioner. Shortly before, he had been sent as a special envoy to Peking with very important dispatches, and this incomparable horseman had made the journey between Uliassutai and Peking, that is 1,800 miles, in 9 days, incredible as it may seem. He prepared himself for the journey by binding all his abdomen and chest, legs, arms and neck with strong cotton bandages to protect himself from the racks and strains of such a period in the saddle. In his cap he bore 3 eagle feathers as a token that he had received orders to fly like a bird. Armed with a special document called a tsara, which gave him the right to receive at all post stations the best horses, one to ride and one fully saddled to lead as a change, together with 2 ulachin or guards to accompany him and bring back the horses from the next station or urtan, he made the distance of from 15 to 30 miles between stations at full gallop, stopping only long enough to have the horses and guards changed before he was off again. Ahead of him rode 1 Udlachin with the best horses to enable him to announce and prepare in advance the complement of steeds at the next station. Each Udlachin had 3 horses in all, so that he could swing from one that had given out and release him to graze until his return to pick him up and lead or ride him back home. At every 3rd utan, without leaving his saddle, he received a cup of hot green tea with salt and continued his race southward. After 17 or 18 hours of such riding, he stopped at the urtan for the night, or what was left of it, devoured a leg of boiled mutton, and slept. Thus he ate once a day and 5 times a day had tea, and so he traveled for 9 days. With this servant we moved out one cold winter morning in the direction of Kabdu, just over 300 miles, because from there we had received the disquieting rumors that the Red troops had entered Ulankan and that the Chinese authorities had handed over to them the Europeans in the town. We crossed the river Tsafin on the ice. It is a terrible stream. Its bed is full of quicksands, which in summer suck in numbers of camels, horses, and men. We entered a long winding valley among the mountains covered with deep snow, and here and there with groves of the black wood of the larch. About halfway to Kobdo, we came across the yurta of a shepherd on the shore of a small lake of Baga Nor, where evening and a strong wind whirling gusts of snow in our faces easily persuaded us to stop. By the yurta stood a splendid bay horse with a saddle richly ornamented with silver and coral. As we turned in from the road, 2 Mongols left the yurta very hastily. One of them jumped into the saddle and quickly disappeared in the plain behind the snowy hillocks. We clearly made out the flashing folds of his yellow robe under the great outer coat, and saw his large knife sheathed in a green leather scabbard and handled with horn and ivory. The other man was the host of the yurta, the shepherd of a local prince, Novotsiran. He gave signs of great pleasure at seeing us and receiving us in his yurta. "Who was the rider on the bay horse?" we asked. He dropped his eyes and was silent. "Tell us," we insisted. "If you do not wish to speak his name, it means that you are dealing with a bad character." "No, no," he remonstrated, flourishing his hands. "He is a good, great man, but the law does not permit me to speak his name." We at once understood that the man was either the chief of the shepherd or some high lama. Consequently we did not further insist and began making our sleeping arrangements. Our host set 3 legs of mutton to boil for us, skillfully cutting out the bones with his heavy knife. We chatted and learned that no one had seen Red troops around this region, but in Kobdo and Ulankam the Chinese soldiers were oppressing the population and were beating to death with the bamboo Mongol men who were defending their women against the ravages of these Chinese troops. Some of the Mongols had retreated to the mountains to join detachments under the command of Kagurdov, an Altai Tartar officer who was supplying them with weapons. End of chapter.